You endorsed Mr. Carney for Liberal leader, and at the time you talked about how long you'd known him and how you had worked with him on climate-related issues previously. Did you misjudge him?
After many years of gaslighting, Steven Guilbeault finally admits what they were actually doing the whole time. And Mark Carney just said something that collapses the entire liberal economic narrative. But the scariest part isn't what he admitted, it's how fast the media has tried to bury it. And not one legacy outlet wants to touch it. So we will. I'm Jasmine Lane. Subscribe, like, follow, and comment your thoughts down below. Share this video as well. The Liberals have spent so many years carefully and strategically manipulating the population to think that any time somebody says something that's not from the approved narrative or media outlet, that it's misinformation. They're a conspiracy theorist. They're a far right. Well, unfortunately, that does not look too good now that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives are fact-checking them by using their own quotes.
We are tough on crime and firm on the rights of Canadians.
There is some breaking news. Bill C-9, which is the anti-hate bill that Sean Fraser has been trying to push, has officially been stalled. And not due to the Conservatives, actually, but due to internal Liberal chaos. CBC just broke this, and it confirmed that Sean Fraser's office secretly brokered a deal with the Bloc Québécois, which we talked about last week, which would have removed the religious exemption from Canada's hate speech laws without approval from the Prime Minister's office. And I really want that to sink in for you as we get into how corrupt and convoluted this Liberal government is, which is a major focus of today's episode. The fact that there was a criminal code change negotiated behind closed doors without Prime Minister Mark Carney signing off on it or being a part of what that intention was. So if Bill C-9 were to actually pass, it would promote hatred using certain symbols, hate-motivated crimes as a distinct offense, as well as criminalizing intimidation and obstruction around places of worship.
Here's what people are missing about Bill C-9. It's not really about hate crimes as much as it is about thought crimes. And what really troubles me is that now the government and police officers on the ground can look at your actions and imply or impose upon you what you were thinking when you did it, so that an offense under the criminal code now has a hate crime element to it, which dramatically increases the penalties you would be facing, and is rife for misapplication to control speech. So if you start criticizing a policy or criticizing a group in Canada that's doing something that you think hurts Canada, they can say, oh my God, that's a hate crime. And now you're going to be at the mercy of a police department that's politically correct, laying charges that could destroy your life.
And in a minority parliament, the Liberals do in fact need support from the Bloc, which they tried, and the Bloc said, yes, we'll do that if you remove the religious exemption entirely. And that is something that leaked, that deal leaked. Religious groups obviously exploded, including both Catholic, Christian, and Muslim organizations, warning that it would criminalize the belief itself. And yep, turns out that everything has officially frozen, and Bill C-9 is politically deadlocked at the moment. In essence, they tried to rewrite hate speech law quietly without leadership approval on one of the most dangerous free speech questions in the country, and then they got caught. I don't think that this is about hate crimes at all. I think this is about who decides what beliefs become a criminal offense in Canada. Very similar to what is happening in the UK right now. And it also makes this community note on X that much more hilarious, where Foreign Policy Canada posted a couple days ago that dissenting voices disappear from your feed. It might not be an accident. Some foreign regimes silence critics through takedowns, legal threats, and intimidation campaigns. Learn their tactics and think before you share. And there were readers who added context to this, directly pointing to Bill C-9, which is far from the worst of all of the legislation, which would criminalize forms of protected speech and protest. Pierre Poilievre actually added to this just a few hours ago, writing, "This Liberal government is targeting voices that they disagree with. Bill C-11 grants widespread censorship powers. C-18 blocks news from social media, and C-9 seeks to charge Canadians for quoting politically incorrect scriptures. End Liberal censorship and restore restore free speech for every Canadian. And it does go to show you just how out of touch these people are. And I don't know, like, are you completely incompetent, or do you genuinely just lack self-awareness that you don't even realize you are doing the very thing you are warning people to be mindful of?
You know, we banned Canadian oil from being shipped off the northwest coast of BC. All the while, we can wave at American tankers that are going from Alaska down to the west coast of the U.S. through the same waters. So why not allow us to ship 1 million barrels of Western Canadian oil off to 2.5 billion Asian customers, giving us a new export market so that the Americans know they cannot monopolize our product and pay us low prices. We need to get rid of the emissions cap, the industrial carbon tax. Right now we have an industrial carbon tax on steel, aluminum, cement, concrete, fertilizer. Let's get rid of that tax to unlock the production of the most important commodities that form the bones of an economy.
And this clip is a couple days old. I had shared this on X before the weekend, but I was so not surprised at all to see the way that David Cochrane just peddles the narrative for the Liberal Party, even when, unsuspectingly, I agreed with Robert Fife, who I normally don't at all, but he actually said something 100% accurate here. But take a listen to this.
It's sort of energizing people towards an actual project that they might be able to support, but actually gives them some idea that the economy is
it's important to point out, too, that Canada's contribution to global greenhouse gas emissions is 1.5%.
Yeah, per capita, we're pretty high, though.
Right.
Like we were like double the global average.
But if we sell our natural gas to China and India, that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Maybe if it displaces coal. Like I mean, we hear this argument from Goldie Hyder and others, and I'm not throwing.
It's a legitimate argument.
Well, unless they just add it into their energy mix and don't displace the dirtier stuff, right? Because I mean, you got 1.4 billion people.
But these countries also don't want to be burning coal. Yeah. Their own people don't want to be.
Yeah, because the
pollution is terrible.
Yeah. But it's interesting. Just more on the Abacus data from Coletto. BC, it's a net of plus.
Man, with an answer like that, you would think David Cochrane was a part of the panel, not the taxpayer-funded host of it, who's non-biased, allegedly. You know, shout out to Robert Fife, who I don't typically agree with. Credit where credit is due. Yep, what you said was completely accurate. And my goodness, David Cochrane, I am actually so happy that you mentioned we're pretty high per capita, though, comment, because I hear that a lot and it is just the most irrelevant thing in the world. It's also not how climate impact is measured globally. That's a really important differentiator there. Do you want to know why Canada is the highest per capita? Because it's freaking cold here. It's absolutely freezing for a good chunk of the year. And we also have a pretty small population relative to land mass. By the way, huge distances to travel from cities to towns to provinces within that land mass. And we are a major energy producer. It is actually one of the biggest drivers of our economy. So no duh, we're high per capita, which is a moral framing tool. It's not at all a planetary impact calculation. It's not even considered actually globally. And just to give you an example, when it comes to what is actually considered globally, that is the tonnage, the global tonnage. And on that measure, China is 30%, the United States is about 14%, India 7%, and Canada between 1.4 to 1.6%. So when the global math doesn't support the narrative that you want, the go-to is the per capita guilt trip for a measure that is completely irrelevant. But okay, sure, you can keep saying that. And then additionally, Robert Fife says we can grow our economy and actually make an impact on the environment, if that's what you're all about, by using our product to displace all of the coal in these countries, which is widely supported. That's factually correct. But then David Cochrane says, oh, well, you know, unless they just add it into their energy mix because they have a lot of people and they don't actually displace the dirtier stuff. Well, you know what's funny about that, Mr. Cochrane, is if you had ever researched anything outside of your pre-approved narratives, you would know that in many Asian markets, LNG has directly displaced coal. You would know that the reason why nations have come to Canada and the United States of America in search of LNG is because they want to displace coal. That's actually the dominant trend, is that they're using it to displace all of that bad stuff going into the environment. And it is just so obvious what is happening here, where he didn't lie outright, but Cochrane instead used a very classic narrative containment strategy where he acknowledged what was being said, then immediately injected doubt, shifts to the per capita guilt framing, and then avoids returning to the global emissions math.
If we actually achieve net zero, at least 50% of the population would die of hunger and disease. And no doubt about it, because just one thing, which is nitrogen-based fertilizer, at least 50% of the population depends on nitrogen fertilizer for its existence today. There's no doubt about that. And there's people trying to ban it. And Netherlands and Sri Lanka have already made these kind of moves. And so it is truly a death wish in disguise. And the disguise is to save the earth, which doesn't need saving particularly.
That clip is of the Greenpeace co-founder, Dr. Patrick Moore, who, by the way, is no longer a part of Greenpeace. He has since been totally excommunicated. They say that he is a radical conspiracy theorist, that he's been paid off by far-right groups because he no longer agrees with the whole net zero climate targets, when in reality, he co-founded Greenpeace, which is the same environment movement that Stephen Guilbeault was involved in, as well as many others. And over time, he realized that they were not being honest, that they didn't have it right. So he started to speak out against what he had initially thought was a good thing to do. And now he's honest about the fact that, yeah, no, that's all BS. It's total BS.
You endorsed Mr. Carney for Liberal leader, and at the time you talked about how long you've known him and how you had worked with him on climate-related issues previously. Did you misjudge him?
Microplastics are infiltrating every part of our lives. Scientists estimate that we now consume a credit card's worth of plastic every single week through our food, water, and even the air that we breathe. One study found plastic particles in 100% of human lung samples. And even if you eat clean or avoid packaged foods, you're still being exposed. You can't opt out. And these plastics don't just sit in your body. They cross the gut lining, leach into your blood, and disrupt everything. They've been shown to alter gut bacteria, suppress your immune response, and increase your risk for neurodegenerative disease, metabolic disorders, and cancers. Some plastic toxins like BPA and phthalates mimic hormones. They interfere with fertility and damage DNA. But your gut can help you fight back. Kimchi 1 from Brightcore Nutrition is a potent ally in this toxic world. Packed with over 900 probiotic strains unique to kimchi and proven to break down BPA. It doesn't just support digestion. It helps protect your cells, your brain, your hormones, and your future. Today, you can get 25% off by clicking the link in the description of this video with the code Jasmine. Or, for an even better deal, call my friends at Brightcore for up to 50% off your order and free shipping. Give them a call now at 888-733-9420.
No, I don't think I did. I think I've come to the conclusion that him and I have a different view of how we should go about fighting climate change. I think his view is that it's largely going to be up to the markets, and that government have a role to play in terms of providing incentive tax credits and things like that. But I think I've come to believe that he doesn't see that there's a role for regulations in fighting climate change.
You mean force that people didn't vote for to be implemented by you, an activist, and to destroy our economy by every metric? Okay.
And a plan that was elaborated by myself and others over many years had a combination of fiscal measures like carbon pricing, industrial carbon pricing, regulations, but also massive investment. The 2022-2023 budget provided more than $160 billion of tax credits and investment for clean technologies, for renewable energy, for clean electricity, for interties, so that provinces that generate more renewable energy can sell some to their neighbors that rely more on fossil fuels.
I'm really happy that Stephen Guilbeault bragged about the amazing investment, over $160 billion of investment into, I don't know, losing our energy advantage, our competition advantage, losing resource growth opportunities, manufacturing expansions, foreign direct investment confidence. All those things have failed as a result of these forced regulations that he thinks are really good for the economy, because the core truth is that a forced capital reallocation driven by ideology, emission targets, regulatory BS, and international ESG alignments did nothing for our economy. Did Canada gain $160 billion worth out of what was given to all of these fantasy projects, many of which closed up shop, didn't come to fruition at all? What did these investments actually accomplish? Did they stabilize anything? Did they increase jobs or growth or opportunity? Did they leapfrog us? We can actually go through the data and see what was the end result of $160 billion of taxpayer money. So here's a couple things that investment didn't do. It did not lower the cost for Canadians. It did not make us competitive. It did not stabilize the energy grid, and it has not restored business confidence. To the contrary, actually. It did, however, and maybe this was always the intent, massively expand government control over where capital gets approved, which in turn made Canada completely uninvestable. And that is an aspect that Mark Carney is still trying to push forward. But at the end of the day, that investment wasn't investment. That's a lie to use that word. It was Ottawa promising to cover the losses. They built a subsidy economy, not a productive one. And shockingly, Mark Carney actually admits that again today.
Overall, the budget is designed to unleash $1 trillion in total investment in Canada over the next 5 years. That alone will increase our GDP by over $3,500, or $3,500 for every Canadian worker, more than twice what U.S. tariffs are taking away.
It is kind of funny to see him yet again, more than twice what the American tariffs have taken away. But if you take a look inside of his own Canada Strong Budget 2025, it actually highlights on page number 9 in the introduction that 85% of Canada-US trade is tariff-free. So, how much has those tariffs actually impacted us on an overall full picture scale? Well, they're bragging in here that it's actually quite low. Do you want to know what does hinder our economy, though? And Mark Carney knows this, but in plain English, he openly acknowledged that Canada's future GDP growth will be driven by roughly $1 trillion of new investment over 5 years. But that so-called investment is actually deficit spending funded by borrowing. It's not increased productivity. It's not private sector expansion. It's not exports. Actually, in Budget 2025, Canada Strong, it highlights how much Canada needs to be its own best customer.
The Canadian tax scam. Let's get into it. So the average worker in Ontario earns about $65,000 a year. Let's see how much of that the Ontarian actually keeps. So you get your $65K a year, right? Federal and provincial income tax, $19,500. CPP and employment insurance deductions, $4,000. The government has already taken just around $23,500 from your cash. Then you get your money, you got to go shopping. You got to pay a 13% HST. So far, you've earned $65K, and really that $65K buys you around $36,700 of real purchases.
Your disposable income.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And most people think that at this point, we're done paying taxes. There are hidden taxes inside everything you buy. Gasoline has a 10-cent federal excise tax, 9-cent provincial fuel tax, which adds up to 19 cents per liter indirect tax. And then they charge you the 13% HST on top of that.
It's a tax on a tax.
And then you have to remember that if you're buying from a store, if you're buying from even online, you're buying from a company that has overhead. And they pay taxes. What taxes? So trucking, retail, manufacturing, okay? They pay property tax, payroll tax, corporate tax, and all of those taxes are passed on to you in the price that you pay for the goods that you buy. So by the time you pay at the bill, roughly 25 to 45% of every price tag is baked in taxes. That means your $36,700 of spending power really buys you closer to around $25,000 of real goods and services.
Canada's federal debt exceeds $1.2 trillion already. Annual interest on that debt is now one of the government's fastest growing expenses, and they just want to keep adding more to it. In fact, the Bank of Canada has confirmed that deficit-heavy stimulus contributed to sustained inflation. Food prices have absolutely skyrocketed. Rent has absolutely skyrocketed. Mortgage payments, some people are paying double what they paid in 2021. And now we're told, don't worry, we're just going to borrow some more. And it's an investment into what exactly? Because here's the real economic reality. Number one, if you have a competitive market, you don't need to do things. Lou, I was on a roll. Take two. If you have a competitive market, you don't need to taxpayer invest trillions of dollars. That's not how that works. Capital goes where it is welcomed with open arms. We see that in the United States of America. I mean, how much money have you heard Donald Trump saying that he's going to use of the taxpayer dollar for investment? Almost none, maybe zero in most industries. So that alone is pretty freaking crazy. But also, every borrowed dollar has three outcomes, and you absolutely do not borrow your way into prosperity. That's ludicrous. That's insanity. It inflates the money supply, it devalues your purchasing power, and it transfers future tax burdens onto the working class, onto our youth. And I also think it's incredibly reasonable to draw a comparison here where when the conservatives talk about spending, the media headlines are how reckless, irresponsible they are. Whereas when the liberals borrow $1 trillion, it's some sort of a bold investment move for Canada's future. It's the same debt. It's the same inflation. And it's magically virtuous because it comes from one side and not the other. And again, I will ask you, for what?
Mark Carney promised when he took office,
Canadians will hold account by their experience at the grocery store.
Well, the judgment is in.
The new report this morning says food prices are expected to take up a much bigger share of your household budget next year, projecting an average family of four will pay nearly $1,000 more for food in 2026 compared to this year.
This is outrageous. It's the direct result of liberal taxes, liberal industrial carbon tax on farm equipment, the new liberal food packaging tax, which restricts plastic use.
It's getting harder all the time.
I usually try to aim for as many sales as I can.
Enough is enough. Let's get rid of all the hidden liberal taxes so that Canadians can afford food again.
What in your life has improved? What in your life is going to improve as a result of this spending? I mean, we can use some recent examples with Stellantis and Algoma Steel. They spent hundreds of billions of dollars provincially and federally on those. What happened? Jobs were lost. What happened? They moved to the United States of America. What happened that was good for you? Nothing was. Absolutely nothing was, because you do not spend your investments on subsidies for failing industries that we all then have to pay for in the long term. What they could have done instead was changed the regulatory body. They could have changed policies. They could have tried to keep up with America in being an investable, competitive place, but they didn't do any of that. And instead, they brag about these cherry-picked numbers that don't add up. And the reality of it is that your life is worse and you are broker than ever.
Well, I think it's indicative of a government that's
lost touch with some of the challenges that everyday Canadians are facing. A decline in full-time employment means there's less people that are able to put food on the table for their families. Full-time workers in Canada, the cost of living is so high in BC, still have to access a food bank. I'll add one other point. I met with the president of the Business Development Bank of Canada. She outlined to me this week that there are fewer and fewer entrepreneurs in Canada, so less people feel inclined to start businesses because this government has not created the necessary condition for small businesses to succeed in Canada, and that's an alarming trend, and I think it's something we need to spend a little more time focusing on in Parliament.
And I'm genuinely asking you this question. If you could comment down below, I will be going through them. I always do my best to read as many of them as I possibly can. But what is there something that has actually improved in your life or your community that make the taxes worth it for you? What is that thing? Is there something that I'm missing that is actually a positive out of all of this that makes the suffering and sacrifice worth it? Please, 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 if you have anything like that, let me know in the comments down below. I'm Jasmine Lane. Subscribe, like, follow, and comment your thoughts down below, as I literally just said. Also, share this video. Tomorrow, I will be back with you with a very special episode with Desiree Fixler, round 2 on this show, where she is going to be sharing with us, Mark Carney, his intent. What's actually going on here? Fixler, by the way, is a former World Economic Forum insider, an ESG whistleblower, and she's been very critical on Mark Carney on social media. So we talk all about that from an insider's perspective.